there, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mildra, and I am your gaming monk. I will freely admit, this is a little bit out of my usual wheelhouse. I don't cover miniature war games as much as I do role-playing games. I've got a video from a few years ago that kind of went into why, but it mostly has to do with the fact that I don't have the camera set up to do it, and there's a lot more moving parts involved with covering a miniatures game. However, today, usually, is the operative word. So, Trench Crusade. When this initially made the rounds, it was jumped on by a lot of folk as an alternative to Warhammer 40,000. Then there was some drama with the community management, weird that keeps happening, and then things kind of simmered out. At the time I'm recording this, it's had a successful Kickstarter and is currently doing a late pledge run. But what is Trench Crusade? Put simply, a miniature war game depicting an apocalyptic world focused on the church, or various factions of a church, waging war against a demonic incursion using a lot of World War I aesthetic. That's a bit underselling it, admittedly, but there's plenty of other videos covering the lore of the world, so I don't want to retread that. Instead, I want to take a different approach and tackle how the game actually plays, as that's what was requested of me by Brother Doku. So in the interest of covering my ass, I will note that I'm looking in the playtest rules that are currently available on the Trench Crusade website. While it's doubtful there will be some drastic changes between it and the final release, take what I say here with a grain of salt, especially if you're coming here post-full release. Now, housekeeping out of the way, let me start with the core mechanic. When performing actions, you roll at least 2d6 and compare it to the game's action success chart. A roll of 6 or less is a failure, 7 to 11 is a success, and 12 or more is a critical success. If you're getting powered by the apocalypse vibes from that, I'm right there with you. I got those too. The main modifier is through plus dice and minus dice. These add additional die to the 2 roll, but you still take the 2 highest or 2 lowest if you had a minus die that was added. Most actions will resolve in this manner, but some actions are treated as risky actions, and will say so. Failing these kind of actions ends a unit's activation. Otherwise, they can go through the gamut of potential actions, and there's quite a few of them. Lastly, when units suffer damage, they roll on the injury table, which operates on a similar 2d6 rule of roll 2 die, but you want to roll low because rolling a 1 has no effect. 2 to 6 is a minor hit that makes the target gain a blood marker, I'll get to that in a minute. 7 to 8 puts the unit in a down state, and a 9 to 12 puts them out of action. It should be noted that unlike the action roll, the main modifiers are static modifiers, usually a plus or a minus, instead of modifying dice. Moving on from core actions, Trench Crusade has some elements of resource use that are certainly interesting, the main ones being blood markers and blessing markers. The former represents the gradual wounding of a unit, and can be used against you to generate minus dice on your actions, and plus dice when forced to roll for injuries. On the other hand, blessing markers can be used to aid your actions, and can be spent to add plus dice to action charts. The units that grant them will have it noted, or it'll be noted if it's an equipment that does so. Now, army creation, called war bands in the game, is, much like a lot of miniatures games, a point-based affair. Typically, this is 700 points, with some units and equipment causing a special resource called glory points that you're not going to get at the start and is meant more as a campaign reward. As a general rule, glory points, as mentioned, are campaign bonuses to gain more powerful units and equipment. That 700 point limit, however, is meant kind of for campaign-style play. For one-offs, you have a pool of 900 points and 8 glory points. Now, within campaigns, most scenarios will have a section called Glorious Deeds that lists what kind of triggers will generate glory points, and who can get them and keep them. Individual units will have a very basic set of stats, mostly movement, ranged and melee modifiers, i.e. how many plus dice they may grant, or minus dice, armor, which is a static modifier as mentioned before, and size, as some scenarios will disallow certain units if they're too large. Each unit will have its special rules, of course, as well as the rules associated with their equipment or army, or some units will have special rules. Each army also has at least one variant that carries its own special rules and equipment. But regardless, as a general rule, most of the armies have to have at least one elite unit when constructing them, though there seems to be an exception with the 7-headed court. Since it's based in scenarios, the appearance of a random scenario generator is much appreciated. Even more so, the fact that games are intended to last 5 to 6 turns means there's less risk of getting bogged down in a lengthy encounter, though that length is ultimately going to depend on the army, so I can't say how long a game is going to run, especially given the army size of 700 points. Regardless, when rolling for scenarios, the primary parameters rolled are the type of scenario, the type of deployment, and the type of glorious deeds. The latter of which is rolled by both players for their own side's glorious deeds, while the first two are rolled by just one of them. So with all that said, what do I think of Trench Crusade? Well, I think that it's straightforward stat-wise, and that might actually make it an easier pickup than, say, Warhammer. I do think it might be tricky to manage the blood and blessing markers on an individual basis, but the real adjustment will undoubtedly be the keywords. These are nothing new in miniatures games, but since Trench Crusade is light on unit stat blocks, the keywords and the special rules have a bigger slice of the pie in terms of what a unit can do. Personally, I'd be willing to recommend this to people who prefer campaign play rather than just single scenarios, as it's clear that the ideal way to play and get the most out of its mechanics is through that. That's not to say you can't play single battles, I just feel it's built more for longer affairs. Overall, there's a lot to like about Trench Crusade as is, if you play by its rules. To that end, I'm not entirely sure if people who have more of a 40k background will take to this as easily. Much like the problem I saw when 40k players jumped onto Infinity. The massive die pool kind of thing isn't as present as opposed to resource management. However, those who want a more careful approach, one where the open charge isn't as prioritized, I think will also be a better fit. We'll see how it plays out when the thing finally comes out in 1.0 form. Stay frosty!
In